title idea, the 3 billion glass coma, why China's most expensive supertall is cracking from the inside out. Thumbtext, 10 inch core fracture, tall constructural agony. Music right now. More than 300 meters above the neon-drenched concrete of Shenzhen's's Fujian district, there is a crack. Not a hairline blemish. Not the kind of cosmetic fracture that every high-rise develops as it settles into the soft coastal mud during its first decade. According to an explosive lawsuit filed in the Municipal Higher People's Court, there is a physical fissure 10 inches deep inside the ultra-high-strength reinforced concrete core of the tallest pure residential building in the country. 10 inches straight into the structural spine of the most expensive condominium complex ever engineered in southern China. A project that burned through more than 21 billion yuan. A megastructure marketed to the global elite as the architectural masterpiece of the 21st century. A vertical fortress where a single duplex penthouse sold for an astronomical 580 million yuan. And, according to the dealers who live there, the monument is failing from the inside out. This is the untold story of the Pinnacle Horizon Tower. It is a terrifying case study in physics, unbridled real estate ambition, and the exact corner-cutting decisions that get made when an aggressive developer demands a building look like a weightless column of pure glass and white concrete. And the structural engineers tell him it cannot safely be built that way. It is a narrative complete with a disgraced tycoon who lost everything to corporate foreclosure, an overseas logistics magnate who has never spent a single night in the sky mansion he purchased, and a frantic owners committee now accusing the state-backed conglomerate that erected it of what forensic architects call a deliberate, multi-year cover-up. It is a massive, highly technical scandal, and we are going to break down every single piece of it, because the sanitized corporate PR versions circulating online do not do justice to how this disaster happened, or to how many flashing red warnings were systematically bypassed along the way. To understand the failure, you have to understand the sheer, intoxicating scale of the hubris. In 2013, a legendary real estate tycoon named Wang Shixian stood before a crowded room of international investors at a hospitality summit and announced he was going to build a permanent monument to China's economic miracle. Wang was an old-school, hyper-aggressive market operator who dealt exclusively in tectonic swings. His words, verified by multiple media attendees, were that this tower would redefine the skyline of the 21st century the way the Shanghai Tower did the 20th. He wasn't just selling premium floor plates. He was selling an unshakable place in history. The site was a prime piece of real estate near the high-speed rail corridor, acquired for a staggering 2 billion yuan after a fierce bidding war. To fund his monument, Wang's firm partnered with a massive, state-aligned infrastructure fund based out of Beijing, which stepped in with a mountain of liquidity to rescue the developer's over-leveraged balance sheet. To shape the tower, they retained one of the most celebrated high-tech architects alive, a visionary designer known for clinical, repeating geometric forms and massive cultural projects across Asia. The structural engineering contracts were handed directly to a premier design institute, the elite firm that literally pioneered the modern super-tall concrete pumps system. On paper, it was an absolute dream team, the highest concentration of capital and intellect money could buy. The design produced was famously radical, a perfect, unyielding square grid, entirely uniform, scaled up into an impossibly thin column. The most expensive residential building in the region was engineered as a flawless geometric prism. I am not exaggerating for the camera. The blueprint's hyper-slender layout is a matter of public municipal record, and it is one of those design details that begins as a brilliant artistic concept at the start of construction, only to transform into a structural nightmare as the physics of the real world take hold. Look at the raw dimensions they set out to conquer. A tower rising exactly 426 meters into the coastal sky. 96 stories of luxury residential spaces resting on a footprint that was a perfect square, measuring barely 28 meters on each side. Do the math. That creates an unbelievable height-to-width aspect ratio of 15:1. Let that number sink in. 15:1. In modern structural engineering, A tower is classified as highly wind-sensitive the moment its slenderness ratio crosses 5:1. The Pinnacle Horizon Tower was designed at 3 times that critical threshold. When it finally topped out, it stood as the most slender super-tall residential structure on the mainland. Picture a fragile wooden chopstick balanced vertically on its base, and then picture a Category 4 typhoon screaming in from the South China Sea, hammering the very tip of it. That is the brutal physics problem the engineering team was handed. The ultimate danger in a skyscraper that thin isn't simply that the wind forces push it backward. The true enemy is a violent aerodynamic phenomenon known as vortex shedding. When high-velocity wind strikes a sharp, slender, four-sided structure, it cannot smoothly wrap around the surface. Instead, the airflow shears off. It detaches from the corners, curling into alternating, spinning low-pressure eddies, first off the left flank, then off the right, in a repeating rhythmic cycle. Engineers refer to this hypnotic aerodynamic trap as a von Karman vortex street. And here is where it becomes a life safety crisis. If the frequency of those shedding vortices happens to synchronize with the natural resonant frequency at which the skyscraper inherently wants to vibrate, the two forces instantly lock into a destructive feedback loop. The tower begins to oscillate violently sideways, perpendicular to the direction of the wind, with an amplified force that far exceeds what the raw wind speed should be capable of producing. The taller, thinner, and more rigid the building, the more terrifying this phenomenon becomes. For a commercial office tower, a slight structural sway is deemed tolerable because the white-collar workforce leaves the premises by nightfall. But for a premium residential building, where ultra-wealthy tenants are trying to sleep 80 stories in the air, where they expect their heavy security doors to close effortlessly, where they are trying to fill a designer marble bathtub, harmonic sway is an absolute structural failure. To combat this, the engineering team designed what they believed was an impenetrable, multi-tiered defense against the atmosphere. First, they sliced 5 open mechanical bands directly through the facade of the tower. Each band spanned 2 full floors, spaced precisely every 12 levels up the height of the skyscraper. These are the eerie, dark, hollow gaps you can see slicing through the tower's silhouette from the streets below. The intent was elegant. Allow typhoon force winds to blow clean through the structure, acting like relief holes punched into the sail of a listing ship, breaking up the organized vortex street before it could lock into a synchronized rhythm. Second, at each of those hollow mechanical levels, they buried massive steel outrigger trusses that tied the central reinforced concrete core directly to the thick perimeter columns, drastically increasing the structural stiffness. Third, they enveloped the entire exterior in a heavy grid of high-strength white concrete columns, creating an external structural skeleton. Fourth, they anchored the base with dozens of deep-seated rock anchors bored tens of meters into the solid granitic bedrock of the city. And fifth, at the absolute apex of the tower, they suspended 2 massive tuned mass dampers, monstrous steel counterweights, weighing hundreds of metric tons each, designed to slide in direct opposition to the building's lateral movement. Neutralizing the sway at the epicenter of this entire multi-billion yuan defense system, holding the entire vertical apparatus together, is an 8-meter square reinforced concrete core wall, measuring nearly 80 centimeters thick at its foundation. That core is the literal spine of the skyscraper. It absorbs the wind shear. It bears the twisting lateral loads. It is the single structural component you cannot afford to compromise under any circumstances. Because if that central concrete spine undergoes a structural failure, every single secondary system fails along with it. And that spine, according to the court filings, is exactly where the 10-inch deep crack has opened up. To fully grasp how the spine of a 21 billion yuan skyscraper began to split from within, we have to look at the engineering chronology, a timeline where extreme material science collided with a frantic, high-stakes construction schedule. The municipal records show that the ground broke on the Pinnacle Horizon site in the spring of 2014. The primary state-owned construction enterprise deployed its elite engineering division, an outfit famous for shattering speed records across Asia. But the task they were facing had genuinely never been attempted at this specific scale or slenderness ratio. How do you pour tens of thousands of cubic meters of specialized, ultra-high-performance white concrete into an impossibly narrow, 426-meter vertical column on a tightly constricted urban plot, while keeping the structural density and chemical composition completely flawless from foundation to penthouse? The technical answer was a state-of-the-art, hydraulically operated self-climbing formwork system. This was a massive, fully enclosed automated casting rig equipped with its own heavy-duty concrete, placing boom and tower cranes. Every time a 4-meter vertical segment of the core cured, the entire hydraulic apparatus unlatched itself and crawled roughly 16 feet upward to prepare for the next pour. Floor by floor, the tower rose into the Shenzhen skyline at a speed that local construction bloggers described as blinding. It was the epitome of modern engineering efficiency. But deep within the chemical formula of that beautiful, stark white concrete, a hidden time bomb was being mixed into every single batch, according to the extensive 46-page legal complaint filed by the owners' committee. The fundamental flaw with the tower's exterior concrete skeleton wasn't a lack of structural strength, it was a lack of long-term environmental durability. Under standard Chinese national engineering codes for super tall structures, the engineering consultants strongly recommended adding a high volume of premium fly ash to the concrete mix. Fly ash, a byproduct of coal combustion, is a standard additive used globally to drastically decrease the permeability of concrete, making it highly resistant to microcracking and chemical degradation over decades. But fly ash has a major aesthetic drawback. It darkens the mix, turning the concrete a dull industrial gray. And for the Pinnacle Horizon Tower, gray was an absolute commercial deal-breaker. The developer's entire branding strategy was built around a pristine, bone-white grid that would gleam like a tower of pure ivory against the darker glass curtains of the surrounding financial district. To achieve this, the contractor imported a specialized white Portland cement, selected exclusively for its immaculate color. The lawsuit explicitly alleges that the developer flatly refused to permit the addition of fly ash or any other tint-altering chemical stabilizers, because doing so would ruin the building's signature look and compromise its appeal to elite domestic and international buyers. Internal technical memos leaked during the pre-trial discovery phase reportedly summarized the high-stakes ultimatum in 4 devastating words: color or cracks, the Design Institute. Realizing the vulnerability of a concrete mix devoid of durability additives, frantically proposed a critical safety fallback. If they were legally forbidden from changing the chemistry of the concrete itself, they demanded that the entire exterior skeleton be treated with a thick, elastomeric, waterproofing membrane. This flexible, opaque coating would act as a structural shield, stretching over any hairline fractures that naturally formed as the building settled, effectively blocking rainwater and salty coastal humidity from penetrating the core and reaching the dense web of steel rebar inside. But once again, according to the court filings, the marketing department intervened. The developer allegedly rejected the protective elastomeric membrane because a thick, painted-on coating would dull the natural stone-like texture of the white cement, making the ultra-luxury tower look cheap from the street. Instead, the lawsuit states that the contractor was ordered to apply a clear, low-viscosity silicone sealant, the exact type of water-repellent coating used to protect the composite hulls of high-end yachts. It was completely invisible, allowing the raw, vulnerable white concrete to show through perfectly. The pristine appearance of the skyscraper was prioritized over its permanent structural protection, while these compromise-driven pours were stacking up toward the clouds. The physical toll on the materials was already being recorded by deep subsurface monitoring systems. Skyscraper engineering isn't static. It is a live calculation of massive forces. The lower 38 stories of the tower were cast using an extreme concrete mix rated at nearly 100 megapascals of compressive strength, dense enough to support a literal mountain range. But as the self-climbing formwork raced upward, the timestamps between the pours grew dangerously tight. Concrete requires a strict curing window to dissipate the immense internal thermal heat generated by its chemical reaction. When you pour high-strength concrete too rapidly in a humid, subtropical coastal environment, the outer layers cool and shrink faster than the searing hot interior core, creating thousands of microscopic, internal stress fractures. By the time the tower finally topped out in late 2016 and received its formal municipal occupancy certification in late 2017, the structural concrete was already fighting a silent war against gravity and the elements. Forensic engineering surveys later attached to the lawsuit revealed that, during the final phases of construction, the tower was already exhibiting unusual soil settlement readings. The massive vertical load of the super tall was driving the foundation piles millimeters deeper into the coastal subsoil than the initial geological models had predicted. Because the footprint was so compact, even a minor micro-tilt at the base translates into a significant lateral displacement hundreds of meters in the air. The structural engineers had built a marvel of hyper-slender design, but they had wrapped it in a vulnerable, unreinforced white concrete shell, stripped of its chemical defense systems, and anchored it to a core that was already undergoing massive, unmitigated thermal stress. The tower was certified complete. The marketing films were broadcast across state television, and the wealthiest citizens in the country began transferring their millions to secure a piece of the sky. But the moment the keys were handed over, the physics of the tower began to aggressively unravel. To understand why a 10-inch end fracture in a luxury residential core is sending shockwaves through China's architectural community, you have to realize that the Pinnacle Horizon Tower is not an isolated anomaly. It is the latest, most extreme manifestation of a systemic structural crisis that has plagued super-tall construction across the mainland's exploding urban centers. When you push concrete and steel to the outer limits of physics, the margin for error drops to zero, and China's recent architectural history is littered with cautionary tales where the warning signs were ignored until the structural damage became completely irreversible. Look at what happened in East China in 2021, when a prominent 70-story skyscraper in Shenzhen'S neighboring tech hub began to violently shake without warning.
On a clear afternoon with completely normal wind speeds.
The structure started to oscillate so intensely that thousands of office workers panicked and flooded into the streets. The Municipal Emergency Bureau had to issue an immediate full-scale occupancy ban, sealing the entire building for months. Forensic investigations by the China Academy of Building Research ultimately traced the shaking back to a combination of heavy roof-mounted masts, acting as giant tuning forks, and a lethal synchronization with vortex shedding. The tower was acting as a massive aerodynamic sail, capturing the energy of ambient wind currents and channeling it directly into the structural columns. That incident proved that even a structurally intact skyscraper can be rendered totally uninhabitable if its aerodynamic shape is flawed. But an even more terrifying parallel to the Pinnacle Horizon disaster occurred during the rapid development of the iconic Pudong district in Shanghai. During the construction of one of the world's tallest megastructures, nearby residents began documenting massive, cracking fissures ripping through the surrounding asphalt and concrete plazas. The sheer, concentrated vertical weight of the super-tall tower was compressing the deep, soft clay beneath the city, causing a localized soil settlement that tore apart utility lines and fractured adjacent pavement. Engineers had to rapidly inject thousands of metric tons of specialized grout into the subterranean strata to stabilize the shifting ground. That crisis exposed a fundamental truth that the builders of the Pinnacle Horizon Tower seemed to forget. When you compress millions of tons of high-strength concrete onto a highly compact footprint, the earth beneath responds with an equal and unpredictable force. If you look further north, to the shifting coastlines of Tianjin, you find the ultimate monument to unbridled real estate ambition, a massive 597-meter megatower designed to be the crown jewel of a new global financial center. Construction began with immense fanfare, pouring oceans of high-strength concrete into a colossal central core. But as the domestic real estate market shifted and financing dried up, the project ground to an absolute halt, leaving a monolithic unfinished concrete obelisk piercing the sky. a multi-billion yuan ghost tower completely exposed to the harsh, freezing northern elements for years. When concrete structures of that scale are left abandoned without active climate controls, water infiltration begins to rapidly rot the exposed steel rebar from the inside out. The structural integrity degrades long before the glass curtain wall can ever be installed. The disaster unfolding inside the Pinnacle Horizon Tower combines the absolute worst elements of all these historic failures. It suffers from the extreme aerodynamic vulnerability of the vibrating southern towers, the severe settlement stresses seen in the coastal clay of Shanghai, and the catastrophic water infiltration issues found in unfinished high-rise concrete across the nation. But what makes the Pinnacle Horizon case uniquely dangerous is its ultra-luxury, pure residential designation. In a commercial office block, structural engineers can install massive, industrial bracing systems, visible steel trusses, and giant concrete counterweights directly through the center of floor plates because office layouts are highly adaptable. But in a residential sky mansion, where buyers are paying hundreds of millions of yuan precisely for panoramic, unobstructed 360-degree views of the coastline, you cannot just run a giant steel outrigger diagonal through a billionaire's living room. The aesthetic demands of the super-rich force the engineers to bury all the structural load, earring mechanisms entirely within the central core wall and the slim perimeter skeleton. They stripped the skyscraper of its physical redundancy by choosing a hyper-slender 15:1 aspect ratio and refusing to alter the exterior visual profile with robust structural interventions. The developers effectively backed themselves into a geometric corner. They relied entirely on a single unyielding line of defense, the central reinforced concrete spine. And as the structural records from the ongoing Higher People's Court litigation now show, that single line of defense is cracking under the strain. The architectural parallel isn't just a matter of academic debate. It is a chilling blueprint for how the most expensive residential mountain in the country became a vertical liability. When a $3 billion luxury dream begins to structurally disintegrate, it doesn't happen with a sudden, catastrophic roar. It happens subtly, in the middle of the night, through the expensive plumbing and the high-grade drywall. It begins with the agonizing, personal realization for the people who poured their life savings into the sky that the ultra-premium asset they were promised is mutating into an unmarketable fortress of concrete and glass. Let's step past the corporate PR and look directly at what it has actually been like to live inside the crumbling vertical paradise of the Pinnacle Horizon Tower. The initial handovers of the unit were met with immense fanfare across Chinese social media. Elite property influencers posted sleek video tours of the grand, double-height marble lobbies, the private high-speed elevators that bypass the rest of the city, and the panoramic views of the Shenzhen coastline. The early buyers were exactly the type of high-net-worth individuals you would expect. There was Chen Jun, a brilliant tech entrepreneur who had recently taken his logistics automation firm public on the Shanghai Star Market. He paid a staggering 62 million yuan for a full-floor residence on the 74th floor. There was Zhang Wei, a powerful real estate investor from Zhejiang province who snapped up 3 consecutive mid-tier apartments as a safe asset to hedge against inflation. Many other units were bought under complex corporate entities and anonymous shell structures, functioning not as homes, but as physical Swiss bank accounts parked high above the clouds. But the ink on the final municipal registry documents was barely dry when the structural physics of the tower began to violently push back against the human occupiers. It started with the E element that always finds a building's fatal flaw: water. On a stormy night in November of 2018, less than a year after the first residents moved in, a catastrophic plumbing failure ripped through the mechanical interstitial space between the 83rd and 86th floors. High-velocity water under immense pressure, engineered to fight gravity all the way to the top of the tower, burst through a heavy structural flange. Millions of liters of water cascaded down the interior core, flooding the premium residences below. A high-profile buyer named Li Xiaolu, the chairperson of a massive domestic luxury retail chain, had just signed a contract for a 45 million yuan duplex on the 82nd floor. She walked into her apartment the following morning to find her imported Italian hardwood flooring completely submerged, and water pouring through the custom lighting fixtures like a tropical rainstorm. She immediately sued the developer's asset management arm to rescind her contract and claw back her massive deposit. That specific legal dispute was quietly settled out of court with a strict non-disclosure agreement, but the water didn't care about legal settlements. Over the next 24 months, the water failures became a chronic, systemic nightmare. In late 2019, within a span of just 72 hours, two major high-pressure water lines ruptured on the 60th and 74th floors. This time, the deluge managed to penetrate the central elevator shafts. Millions of yuan worth of specialized electronic control modules and heavy-duty hoisting cables were completely ruined. Water poured down two of the tower's four main residential elevator shafts, rendering them completely inoperable for weeks. Residents living on the upper levels of the tower, people who had paid tens of millions of yuan for maximum convenience, found themselves waiting up to 45 minutes just to catch a single remaining elevator down to the lobby. According to internal insurance assessment records leaked to the higher People's Court, the total physical water damage inside the tower during that phase alone reached a staggering 68 million yuan. More than 35 luxury apartments were heavily damaged by toxic mold and water staining. The building's structural insurance premiums exploded by over 300% in a single 2-year cycle, a crushing operational cost that was immediately passed down to the residents through astronomical monthly property management fees. By 2021, the residents were completely terrified. They formed an emergency owners committee, and the official minutes from those closed-door meetings read like frantic dispatches from a haunted ocean liner lost at sea during a violent storm. Tenants reported a constant, unsettling symphony of structural agony. When the high-velocity winter winds or summer typhoons battered the upper stories of the slender tower, the internal metal partitions and heavy steel stud frames inside the walls would groan, click, and pop as the building flexed. Residents described a piercing, high-pitched whistling sound that resonated through the door frames and elevator shafts 24 hours a day, a constant sonic reminder of the immense atmospheric pressures acting on the glass facade outside. Worse still was the behavior of the water inside the homes. The complaints filed with the local housing bureau document that when the tower entered a sustained aerodynamic sway during high wind events, the water inside the upper floor bathtubs and designer toilets would violently slosh back and forth. The lateral movement was so pronounced that it became physically impossible to fill a bathtub because the water would not sit still. The movement triggered severe motion sickness in several elderly residents, forcing them to temporarily check into luxury business hotels on the ground floor just to escape the vertigo of their own living rooms. And then there is the technical detail that, more than any other, captured the dark humor of the local real estate community, the luxury trash chute. To maintain the pristine, uncluttered minimalism of the residential floors, the architect had designed a single, straight, vertical garbage chute that dropped roughly 400 meters straight down to the basement compaction room. It was an elegant concept on paper, but it completely ignored the laws of linear acceleration. The chute possessed no intermediate brakes, no curves, and no decelerating offsets to slow objects down. When a resident on the 90th floor dropped a heavy, tightly packed bag of household trash into the opening, that bag accelerated down a 400-meter vertical drop, completely unimpeded. By the time it neared the bottom of the column, the garbage bag was traveling at something approaching terminal velocity, crashing through the vertical tube like a missile. According to the official minutes of the owners' committee meetings, residents living on the lower residential floors reported that the impact of the falling trash vibrated directly through the structural concrete walls of their master bedrooms. They described the sound as a heavy bomb going off inside the building on an unpredictable, recurring daily schedule. Imagine paying over 30 million yuan for an exclusive urban sanctuary. only to be jolted awake at 3 in the morning by what sounds like an artillery strike because a neighbor 60 floors above threw away a glass soy sauce bottle. Then came the terrifying night of October 31st, 2022. A powerful seasonal front swept across the coastline, bringing gale-force wind gusts that slammed into the upper third of the tower. A resident stepped into one of the high-speed residential elevator cars on a high floor to head down to the lobby. As the car descended, the building's extreme lateral deflection in the wind caused the massive steel elevator guide rails inside the shaft to slightly bend out of alignment. The elevator's automated safety system instantly detected the structural variance, triggered the emergency brake clamps, and brought the car to a grinding halt. That wealthy tenant sat trapped inside a dark, swaying metal box, suspended hundreds of meters in the sky above the city, for exactly 1 hour and 25 minutes, while emergency engineering crews frantically worked to manually override the system. The cause of the entrapment traced back directly to the building's aerodynamic movement, exceeding what the high-speed elevator infrastructure was physically capable of absorbing. The operational chaos culminated in a near-fatal industrial accident in June of 2024. A specialized electrical maintenance contractor was working inside a high-voltage mechanical room on the 48th floor, trying to locate a persistent water leak that was dripping onto a main electrical riser. As he cleared a panel, his drill bit inadvertently pierced into a live, unmapped primary electrical conduit. The contact triggered a massive arc flash explosion. The blinding blast threw the technician across the room, causing severe electrical burns and knocking out primary power to a 12-story segment of the tower. According to the furious complaints later compiled by the owner's committee, this was the second major high-voltage electrical explosion inside a mechanical space in less than 36 months, both driven by water infiltration, rotting out the core electrical infrastructure. If you are keeping a running tally in your head of every single defect, every shattered pipe, every short-circuited panel, and every structural failure inside this multi-billion won high-rise before it even reaches its 10th birthday, I want you to drop your estimate in the comment section right now. Just give me your gut number of how many distinct building defects a rigorous, independent forensic survey would uncover in a compromised supertall like this. Hold on to that number, because when I reveal the true figure that the forensic engineers actually arrived at when they finally stripped back the drywall, I want to see how close your intuition was. The structural reality discovered by forensic investigators went far beyond the daily operational nightmares of the residents. In late 2024, after years of mounting tension, the owner's committee managed to bypass the developer's asset management team and hired an independent engineering consortium to conduct a comprehensive, non-destructive testing sweep of the entire property. They utilized advanced ground-penetrating radar, ultrasonic pulse velocity sensors, and high-resolution thermal imaging. The number they arrived at was a devastating blow to the property's value. The independent survey documented more than 1,800 distinct construction and design defects throughout the common structural elements of the skyscraper alone. Over half of those items were classified as immediate life safety hazards. In April of 2025, armed with this definitive metallurgical and structural data, the owners' committee launched their second, far more aggressive lawsuit in the higher people's court. This 46-page legal filing didn't just ask for routine maintenance funds. It sought a staggering 1.1 billion yuan in total structural damages and used a highly specific phrase: deliberate and systemic construction fraud. The heart of the new accusation turns entirely on the presence of that 10-inch fissure inside the central reinforced concrete core wall. According to the lawsuit, the clear silicone coating applied to the exterior white concrete facade completely failed within the first 48 months of exposure to the intense coastal UV radiation and humid, salty typhoons. Without the thick, elastomeric waterproofing barrier originally demanded by the Design Institute, rain poured directly into the microcracks that had formed during the rapid, overheated concrete pours. Once that moisture bypassed the exterior shell, It migrated deep into the primary load-bearing columns and the central core walls. The water reached the massive, dense grid of high-tensile steel rebar. And when water hits steel encased in concrete, chemical oxidation begins. The steel rusts. As it rusts, it expands to several times its original structural volume, generating thousands of pounds of internal pressure. This internal expansion splits the surrounding concrete from the inside out, allowing even more water to flood into the core in an unstoppable, accelerating feedback loop of structural decay. The lawsuit alleges that developers were fully aware of this deep structural degradation as early as 2019, while they were still actively marketing the remaining high-floor units to unsuspecting buyers. The complaint points out a chilling modification made to the building's official offering and disclosure prospectus. The original legal documentation guaranteed that the high-density concrete core will permanently prevent moisture penetration. The revised version, slipped into later buyer contracts, was quietly altered to state that the core was designed to prevent moisture penetration. In a court of law, that minor edit represents the infinite chasm between a binding structural guarantee and an unbacked architectural hope. The financial fallout surrounding the tower has completely mirrored its physical decay. The developer's personal empire collapsed in a chain reaction of corporate defaults. In a poetic turn of absolute financial ruin, the tycoon Wang Shixian had purchased 3 massive luxury units in his own tower using multi-million yuan loans extended by his state-backed investment partners. As the scale of the structural defects leaked out and property values plummeted, Wang defaulted on those massive liabilities. In late 2025, his former financial partners movingly foreclosed on his personal apartments inside the very tower that bore his name, selling them off through judicial auctions for a fraction of their original valuation. The iconic duplex penthouse on the 96th floor, the 580 million yuan trophy that became the international face of the development, stands completely empty. Its wealthy overseas owner has spent years aggressively slicing tens of millions of yuan off the asking price, trying to unload the asset in a luxury market that now views the skyscraper as a vertical liability. The world's wealthiest investors look at the pending Higher People's Court litigation, look at the ultrasound scans of the fractured core, and walk away. The ultimate bill for fixing the Pinnacle Horizon Tower has not even been fully tallied. Engineering estimates suggest that completely excavating, reinforcing, and sealing the 10-inch crack inside the central core wall, alongside a complete overhaul of the massive, worn-out tuned mass dampers at the apex of the building, could easily exceed 700 million yuan on its own. For a structural monument that is not even a decade old, the ongoing cost of legal fees and emergency engineering stabilization is consuming oceans of capital every single month. This brings us to the final, unsettling reality of the Pinnacle Horizon Tower. It stands as an architectural warning cast in white concrete and glass. When real estate speculation treats iconic skyscrapers purely as vertical safety deposit boxes to park wealth, and when the aesthetic demands of marketing departments override the fundamental laws of structural physics, the building itself eventually forces a correction. The 10-inch crack, deep inside the central spine of this multi-billion yuan tower, is a physical monument to what happens when human ambition tries to cheat the unyielding rules of gravity, wind, and time.